President Xi Jinping says that China and the U.S. have reached agreement on a number of issues during Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing.
Burials have begun for those brutally killed by militants in Uganda on Friday, in the worst massacre the country has seen since 2010.
Russian shelling in Ukraine's flooded city of Kherson leaves vehicles engulfed in flames and heaps further strain on residents and emergency services.
Chinese President Xi Jinping gave a positive assessment of a meeting in Beijing with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was quoted as saying the two sides have also made progress and reached agreement on some specific issues. This is very good. Blinken's two-day visit is the highest-level trip to China by a U.S. official since President Joe Biden took office. In earlier meetings between Blinken and senior Chinese officials, the two sides expressed willingness to talk, but showed little inclination to bend on hardened positions. Tensions have been particularly acute over U.S. congressional delegations visiting Taiwan and China's refusal to condemn Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. White House officials downplayed expectations of any significant developments from Blinken's visit, but it does pave the way for further contacts and possibly even a meeting between Biden and Xi in the coming months.
Grieving families have begun burying their dead in western Uganda, while others search desperately for missing loved ones. It follows Friday's brutal attack by militants who killed dozens of pupils housed in two dormitories in a co-ed secondary school. Officials say at least 41 people were massacred and half a dozen kidnapped in the worst attack of its kind in Uganda since 2010. Some students were burnt beyond recognition, others were shot or hacked to death with machetes. The attack has been blamed on the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, which has established ties with the Islamic State. They are largely based in the neighbouring Democratic Republic of the Congo. In response, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has vowed to send more troops to the unstable border region between Uganda and the DRC. The raids appear to have taken the Ugandan authorities by surprise. First responders only arrived after the attackers had left.
Fires broke out in the city of Kherson on Sunday night after Russian missiles targeted the war-torn eastern city. Shelling left a dozen buses engulfed in flames and a rescue service excavator destroyed. Emergency services here are overwhelmed after the collapse of the Kakhovska Dam on the 6th of June. Dozens of villages are flooded and thousands of people are in need of assistance every day. But access to food and water is just one of many concerns felt by residents here.
Страшно туда ходить. Там тоже есть помпа, где качать вода. Ну, страшно туда ходить.
The UN has accused Russia of blocking access to flood-hit areas under its occupation. Elsewhere, Ukraine says it has regained more than 100 square kilometers of territory since its counter-offensive began. Moscow claims that 7 civilians were wounded in Ukrainian shelling in Russia's Belgorod border region.
Germany is strengthening its role within NATO, days after approving the first national security strategy, which envisages the highest military expenditure since the Second World War. The German Chancellor wants to make clear to its Secretary General the importance of the military alliance.
Die NATO ist und bleibt der zentrale Garant unserer kollektiven Sicherheit. Wir werden einen großen Teil der Bundeswehr für die Bündnisverteidigung der Allianz verlässlich bereithalten.
Stoltenberg has welcomed Germany's plans to spend 2% of GDP on defense by 2024 and referred to the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Ukraine has the right to liberate its own land, and a counteroffensive is now underway. The more land the Ukrainians are able to liberate, the stronger their hand will eventually be at the negotiating table.
The two leaders spoke of the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius, which will not result in a formal invitation to Kiev to join the alliance. Global warming is advancing faster than expected in Europe. An annual report by the World Meteorological Organization and the European Copernicus Network says the average temperature on the continent is 2.3 degrees warmer than it was at the end of the 19th century. This overheating doubles the global average and fuels exceptional heat waves and droughts. As can be seen in this graph, warming has soared since the 1990s, breaking temperature records on several occasions. The heating has been uneven geographically, reaching around 2 degrees above average in much of Western Europe and even exceeding 3.5 degrees in regions close to the Arctic. Summer last year was the hottest on record in many European countries. The report says extreme weather-related events have claimed more than 16,000 lives and directly affected 156,000 people.
Some 200 people in the Greek port city of Piraeus marched to the offices of Frontex and the Hellenic Guard on Sunday, protesting their handling of last week's deadly shipwreck off the coast of Pylos. There are mounting questions as to whether the Greek Coast Guard should have intervened earlier to help get the migrants on board to safety. Up to 750 men, women and children from Syria, Egypt, the Palestinian territories and Pakistan were on board the vessel trying to reach Europe when it sank. A church service was held on Sunday at the nearby port of Kalamata in memory of the victims. More than 500 people are presumed to have drowned, although only 78 bodies have been recovered. To date, 104 survivors were rescued. The Greek Coast Guard and government officials say their patrol boats and nearby cargo ships had been shadowing the fishing boat after it was spotted by a surveillance plane from Europe's Frontex border agency. They say they offered assistance, but it was rejected by someone on board the overcrowded trawler.
Violent clashes erupted in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin on Monday, as Israeli soldiers and Palestinian militants engaged in a bloody standoff. The confrontation resulted in the deaths of at least 3 Palestinians, including a 15-year-old boy, while at least 29 others were wounded. Israeli sources say the fighting erupted when soldiers conducting a raid in search of wanted suspects came under fire. The incident is the latest in a series of deadly clashes to take place in the West Bank over the past year.
Swiss voters have approved a new climate law aimed at slashing fossil fuel use and reaching net zero by 2050. In a referendum, the legislation received the support of 59% of voters, according to public broadcaster SRF. The Nationalist Swiss People's Party had objected to the government's proposals, saying such measures would cause energy bills to rise. But a campaign by scientists and environmental groups argued the country's melting glaciers would soon vanish completely if greenhouse gas emissions were not reduced.
Citing national security concerns, Italy has blocked China's Sinocam from extending its control over Milan-based tyre maker Pirelli. The Chinese conglomerate is the largest shareholder in Pirelli with a 37% stake. The new restrictions imposed by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's government will prevent Sinocam from appointing Pirelli's CEO, among other decisions. The government noted concerns about access to sensitive technology, saying that Pirelli's products are of national strategic importance.
Spanish rail company Renfe will launch its high-speed trains on the French market on the 13th of July, with services between Barcelona and Lyon, followed by Madrid and Marseille on the 28th of July. The company also has its sights set on Paris and other possible cities. Since December, only SNCF has been operating between France and Spain. The French company has ended its links with Renfe to support TGVs, which it's had since 2013.
It's 7 decades since the Conference of European Rabbis opened its headquarters in London, an alliance of Jewish leaders coming together to support and protect, through political influence, Jewish communities across Europe. But since Brexit, the organisation has been looking for a new home. They've now found one and have begun the process of moving to Germany. Munich.
There were a number of raised eyebrows, let's put it that way.
Shimon Cohen is a London-based member of the Conference of European Rabbis. He explains the rationale behind the move.
There's a perfectly sensible understanding right across our membership that London was no longer the place to be to have influence in European policy. The reality is now it's not going to be the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom that the European Parliament listened to, and therefore we have to be headquartered in part of the European Union.
Null Toleranz gegenüber den Intoleranten.
Last month, Bavaria's president, Dr. Markus Söder, at a gathering in Munich, was given an award by the Conference of European Rabbis, in part for having extended the initial invitation to move to the city.
The Conference of European Rabbis was formed here in London shortly after the end of the Second World War. Now, from a purely practical and pragmatic perspective, they've taken the decision to move to Europe. But for many, it's not just about a political influence, but there's an emotional decision being made too.
Why? Because the destruction of European Jewry started in Munich. And therefore, it is very symbolic that we are coming back to Munich with the support of the government, and we are in the process of rebuilding European Jewry.
The city where Adolf Hitler began his rise to power, generations ago, the capital of the Nazi movement. Now once again home to a thriving and influential Jewish movement. Luke Hanrahan, Euronews, London.